The Fast and Furious Chaos faction Slaanesh, focusing on their overwhelming speed to quickly dish out damage and overcome the enemy. Great and fast infantry choices combined with fast monsters and cavalry. Lacking missiles and armor overall, they do compensate with some magic and good lord and hero choices. In this video, I will show you the unit stats before and after research, XP and Redline skills, and I will go over each lord and hero as well. Let us begin. So in terms of their army roster, it has some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages being great infantry, good cavalry, great chariots, and good single entities. Overall, everything is quite fast in the Slaanesh roster, and that is how you intend to use that army roster. The disadvantages are, of course, has some armor issues, has almost no flyers, and also almost no missile units, so it will suffer against heavily flying armies. Be careful with those. As for their specific race and faction abilities, they do have the Mark of Slaanesh. It gives immunity to psychology, the Strider attribute. Remember, this negates high ground disadvantages. It's very good. Physical resistance and some speed, which is why, of course, marked units of Slaanesh will always be faster than most other enemies. In addition, we also have Devastating Flanker, so entities with this attribute, they do double their charge bonus when attacking the rear or flank of an entity. So you already will see that many of the units from Slaanesh have this attribute, which means that you should always try to flank with their units, of course. Then we also have the Soul Scent, a passive ability that grows in intensity with each enemy unit that has a leadership of wavering or lower. So get the enemies to waver, and suddenly your units will doing a lot more damage and faster because their melee attack goes up. Adding to that, we also have the Soul Hunters in many of the units, which adds leadership, damage resistance and charge bonus with each kill. So these units are perfect actually to chase off enemy units that had wavered, and then they'll just hammer and navel whatever is resisting. So overall, a very nice idea to have is to ensure that you waver some unit and then you chase off with these guys and then you proceed to hammer and navel with them. In terms of army abilities, Slaanesh has the Sweet Sorrow, a speed and charge, speed and vigor per second, affecting one ally for only 15 seconds. Be careful, you always need to do it right as they are about to go in and charge someone. You also have Narcissism, a great ability. It cannot move, an enemy cannot move for 16 seconds, and it is also silence, perfect against enemy casters. Okay, they won't be able to cast any spells. This is perfect to save up for a powerful caster, like Manfred, for instance. Take him out. And then, as the third and final ability, we have Fascination. This is a direct damage. It's quite good. It does a lot of damage, and it also causes the enemy to rampage. As it says, they're strong versus 25-man unit or above, but by all means, this is just to ensure that the enemy rampages. It's always good to give out more damage as well. And then, to generate this, you kill entities in units that have negative leadership states, so always ensure that you keep chasing those routing units so that you can build up these army abilities. For your first lords, we have none other than Kari. He's a spellcaster with a lore of Slaanesh, a very powerful lore as well, and he has armor-piercing attacks with also a nice melee attack, which is magical attack. It's always excellent to have that. Armor, that's his weakness. He doesn't have a lot of it, so keep him moving. Ensure that he's not attacked by any archers or any crossbows or any handgunners or any missiles of any kind, and that's how he is going to shine. Overall, charging him through the front line and reach the enemy back line, because that's where he's going to do a lot of damage, take out the enemy caster or lord. For abilities, he has Soul Siphon, which is a direct damage aura when the enemy is wavering or they are lower. Notice the theme of when the enemy is wavering, there's always something that triggers. Then we have Harvester of Souls, healing if an enemy unit is destroyed. So overall, this will activate if they are destroyed within 30 meters. Just make sure that Nakari is nearby. And then you also have the passive ability improved with a greater effect on replenishment as well. So overall, he can heal himself really well. Just make sure that you're there. Willing Prey reduces the melee attack and melee defense greatly. This is perfect to cast on an enemy hero or lord. And in addition to that, we also will have the Soporific Musk, which gives a slight small reduction with melee defense and melee attack. This is great for anything. It's just a passive, really, so that really helps out overall. Then finally, we have Whisper of Glory, which is an area debuff to the enemy when the leadership is high, and actually the hit points are high. So overall, he's going to do quite a lot of damage even when the enemy is not wavering, which is perfect. It synergizes. Then he has the other effects. The Withstill Sword, it gives a nice weapon damage, massive buff of weapon damage, which is perfect to chase off other enemy lords and heroes. Now, to the Herald of Slaanesh that we have here, not a lot of good stats, always that issue with the health and the armor. Decent speed, which is excellent. He can even outrun some of the cavalry in the game. Melee attack and melee defense are good. Good weapon strength with armor piercing. So for a spellcaster, it's always nice to have some good damage ideas, which is excellent. It's always what you want to do, is having a spellcaster that actually can defend against other spellcasters, for instance. It's going to be fine. For the abilities, also the Soul Siphon, so that direct damage aura when the enemy is wavering or lower. Just ensure that you are nearby if an enemy is, or you can even chase with the Lord. And then we have the ability Locus of Grace, a melee defense and physical resistance to allies. This is perfect to have on the front line, of course. Or you can have a Locus of Swiftness for charge bonus speed and charge speed. For instance, this is great if you plan to use the Lord on the flanks. And then we have the Locus of Bewilderment, which is a leadership debuff and melee defense affecting enemies in range. So if you wish to further go down with the leadership of the enemy, use that one. Then we can have the next Lord, the Exalted Keeper of Secrets. He can have the Lore of Shadows or Slaanesh, powerful damage with a bonuses versus large, so he's good against other enemy lords. Just note that he does have a shield, but very poor armor, good melee attack, strong melee defense, so very nice duelist, really, to have. Overall, it's the magic and the speed that makes this lord really special, but also the abilities. So let's check them out. And of course, like others, the Soul Siphon is always there. Affects enemies in range when the leadership is wavering or lower. Just make sure that you always remember to at least put the lords near when that happens. Then we have Feasting on Fear, which synergizes really well, which is a regeneration ability when enemies are wavering or lower. So feel free to go against enemies that are to chase enemies away, because you're going to regenerate. That's perfect, and they're going to take damage. So anything that tries to attack you also takes damage. It's a good synergy. Then Ballet of Blows, the 3 stages of an augment to damage and attack. Basically, that's what is going to happen. You're going to hit harder and with more often. And then also the Seductive Glory, which is a melee defense and the Rampage debuff to enemies in range, which is perfect. Rampage is so powerful, especially if there's enemy casters, for instance. That's always great. And in addition, it also has at the end of the yellow line the Colossal Strike, which gives an extra bonuses versus large. So overall, the Exalted Keepers of Secrets, great against enemy lords or heroes or even single entities. Now, the final lord is the Chaos Lord of Slaanesh. Opposite to the others, he's armored and shielded, but doesn't have any armor-piercing damage or anything really. It's just a tank, but a massive tank at that. 65 melee attack and 55 melee defense means that he will survive for quite a long time and even defeat normal heroes or lords, basically, just nothing like legendary status or something like that. For abilities, overall, he has the heroic killing blow. It's a very known one, typical in some heroes and lords, but that base weapon damage and damage buff, it's really cool. Then we have Slaanesh Mark, the Locus of Bewilderment, so the leadership reduction, melee defense. Remember, everything that counts with the waiver of enemies, so leadership debuffs are always good to stack. Then we have the Paragon of Excess, a melee attack debuff to enemies in range, also very good. So overall, very good to go on the front line with this guy. In terms of heroes, the first one, the Cultist of Slaanesh. Basically a melee specialist, anti-infantry, but has low armor. It's still speedy, which is great. Has a nice bonuses versus infantry, so against weaker infantry, especially at the beginning, don't feel bad. Send him in or her in, and that will be cool. Low armor, so just be careful against enemies that have a ton of damage. Not necessarily armor piercing, by the way. So, but overall against spears, for instance, perfect. In terms of abilities, the Cultist, of course, is really good to have the Gate of Slaanesh, which is a summoning. It's a summon ability, which is great. Summons a unit of demonettes. You have 3 uses later on, which is perfect. Always good to have summons in campaign. And then we have even the Greater Gate of Slaanesh, which summons a powerful Keeper of Secrets, which is perfect as well. You always have to be engaging in melee, so make sure that you select a good target for the Cultist to survive, not necessarily to kill. That's how you're going to use it. So the LRS of Shadows or of Slaanesh is a nice spellcaster with armor piercing, good stats across the board overall with magical attacks, still the poor armor, always consistent with Slaanesh, a good melee defense, so it's something that they seem flimsy but not in melee. In melee they will do a lot of damage and they'll survive quite a while. Not a lot of health, but still, it's still a good idea to keep them in melee. Just be careful with a lot of ranged factions. If they focus fire, you're dead. So of course you have the Lore of Shadows of Slaanesh, that helps out as well. In terms of abilities, you have the Locus of Grace, which is a melee defense and physical resistance given to allies. This is perfect to use on with the front line, so just keeping her nearby, it's really great. You also have the possibility, by the way, these are all mutually exclusive, of going with the cavalry or with the chariots with that charge bonus speed, charge speed. So let's say that you get this on a mount with the Seeker Chariot or Exalted Seeker Chariot, that's perfect. Or you also have the Locus of Bewilderment, a hex to the enemy of minus leadership and melee defense. Remember all those effects with the wavering, it's perfect to use with that. If you prefer, you have the Chaos Sorcerer of Slaanesh of Shadows or Slaanesh lore. Good armor, no shield, so be careful, it's not like the Lord version. Good melee attack and melee defense, not a lot of weapon strength, and it's still not armor piercing, so it seems more powerful than it is, but still quite a nice hero to have, and a caster hero at that. So it will defeat many other caster heroes if needed. So that's always good to have a versatile hero here. And then in addition for abilities, it has a Soul Feeder. Let me show you here. It's a passive ability that replenishes the hit points when casting a spell. So it's perfect to heal when casting. That's why you can actually send the hero in some combat and it will have that replenishment. Or you can have the bound spell Lesser Doombolt, which is a bombardment, armor piercing spell. Always good to have a bombardment spell overall. So yeah, you note that they are mutually exclusive, so always be careful with those mutually exclusive options. So should be noted that for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use the Redline skills of the Heralds, because they are different from the ones from the Chaos Lords. So just be wary that, for instance, mostly the Heralds will give buffs in terms of the speed, the charge bonus, the weapon strength, the melee attack, giving more damage. While the Chaos Lords, for instance, are more defensive. They give some resistances, some armor, some melee defense focuses. So if you're more on that style, I'll recommend going with the Chaos Lords. If you're more on the attacking style, I'll recommend going with the Heralds. Note that they affect different units, of course, and combinations of units. So I do recommend that you study these a little bit so that you can have the most out of your units or desired units to use in battle. The first infantry unit, the Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh. Overall, they do have a nice shield, not a lot of armor, decent stats across the board, including good speed and, of course, melee attack. Melee defense, it's not too bad, you know, it's nearing the 30 limit, let's say. Good weapon strength, considering that it's just a basic unit. It has some nice armor piercing there. And always remember the Strider, the physical resistance, it makes them fight longer. So, in terms of the late game, these units, of course, you're not going to be using them too much in the late game, but never underestimate a small stack of these guys on a pinch to just close up a deal with another enemy army. It's good to recruit, they're cheap, so it's overall a nice idea to have a couple of these. Now, Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh with spears are of course anti-large. That's the main selling point. Lower melee attack but higher melee defense always helps as well. So a little bit more of a frontline unit while you prepare the hammer, the anvil in this case for your hammer for the cavalry. In the late game they can still be quite useful, at least until, you know, mid-quality cavalry for instance, or mid-quality monsters. Just don't expect them to take out any strong melee units or cavalry later on. In terms of an ROR, the Princes of Perfection, Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh with Spears, Regiments of Renown. So they do have a charge defense against all and perfect vigor, which is always nice, and also a nice silver shield. So they are perfect to actually hold on the line against those missiles. A Soporific Musk, it means that the enemy is reduced in melee defense and melee attack, so they're perfect to deal with most enemy cavalry in the beginning to the mid-game. Really a nice addition to your roster. Devoted Marauders with Hell Scourges. These guys have a nice particularity in that they have poison attacks. So overall, whenever you see me talk about Hell Scourges or anything, they do have poison attacks. They still have that shield, low armor, but the main advantage is to lower the enemy stats. It's much easier. They'll really be holding the line for quite a while. And with the high melee attack and melee defense values, and also nice weapon strength, not a lot of armor piercing, but their main selling point is to hold, not to cause damage. And that's also true for the late game. Even recruiting some of these guys, come on, 44 melee attack, 53 melee defense, that's crazy for a unit that it's quite cheap and promptly available anywhere. So if you're on a pinch, remember these guys, especially late game. Nets of Slaanesh, quite a nice unit. Don't forget that they are demonic as well. They do have very low armor, so they're very squishy, very vulnerable to missiles. Their main selling point is that melee attack, melee defense, that speed. They're almost like cavalry's speed, and they have armor piercing damage. So the first real true damage dealer unit is here. High charge bonus. Also the demonic, be careful with the leadership getting low. Devastating flanker means that you always should use them to flank enemy units, but of course just make sure that you try to pick up good targets for them. Even in the late game you can recruit a few of these. I mean, 56 melee attack and 50 melee defense is nothing to shy away from, especially with that physical resistance 30%. You can truly surprise some enemies. Then we have the Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh. Overall, your first grounded unit, let's say. High armor to change up things a little bit from this low armor idea. The nice shield. You also have melee attack and melee defense, quite nice values. Weapon strength doesn't have a lot of armor piercing, but it's still better than nothing, I would say. And a good charge bonus. For a holding infantry line, always remember to charge these guys, always, okay? In addition, they do have that strider, they do have their physical resistance, so it's always nice to have these guys holding the line well into the late game, especially once you get them upgraded. 59 melee defense, it's really good. That leadership goes up. That melee attack is always nice. That's perfect. And for a Mirror Guard, which is the ROR of the Chaos Warriors, you also have magical attacks with these guys, which is perfect. They have that silver shield. They have higher melee attack and melee defense. Nice weapon strength still, but their selling point is this: the melee defense plus 10 augmented to an unit, an ally unit, lord or hero. So they're perfect to follow your lord or your hero in battle. They'll position them attacking whatever target they are doing, and they'll do just great. Now, for Forsaken of Slaanesh, they have a Frenzy, that's why the stats are all altered there, so good melee attack, weapon strength, and charge bonus, of course. Notice that their weakness, of course, is no shield and lower melee defense. That Frenzy, of course, giving also the immunity to psychology, which is great, and they do have the Devastating Flanker. So these guys are kind of cool to accompany, let's say, the Demonettes, if you want, like a Demonette Forsaken army. It's very squishy, but if every single unit is squishy, you can charge them in to everything, and that's always a good idea. In the late game, of course, they don't get a lot of melee defense, so be careful. There will always be a squishy unit. A very easy unit to use, although just a nice damage dealer overall if you don't want the Demonettes or if you just want a little bit of armor. And then we have the Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh with Hell Scourges. Like I mentioned before, Hell Scourges means poison attacks, and they are a nice defender, nice melee defense, nice overall stats. Just remember that because they're Hell Scourges, they don't have a lot of armor piercing damage, so be careful with that. It's not the typical ratio, it's a little bit lower, so make sure that you understand these guys are supposed to hold your line, not kill too many units, okay? But they do have that expert charge defense, so these guys are perfect to have on your flanks against enemy cavalry, just making sure that they poison debuff them, and then you send anyone else against them. In the late game, you can definitely use these guys. I mean, 41 melee attack, 71 melee defense with all the armor and leadership and everything. These guys will hold the line like anything. They will seem chosen to you before you even remember to upgrade them. Then we have the Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, so the more powerful version of the Demonettes. They have that armor piercing, that magical attack, good melee attack and melee defense values, nice speed, but as well, always that squishy armor, so be very careful. They do a ton of damage. 50 damage with armor piercing is crazy with that charge bonus. Also the devastating flanker, if you can manage, that is great. And always note that they do have the soul scent, so send them in. If there's any units routing or starting to waver nearby, they'll just go up to town with anyone that they find. Overall, a very nice unit. You can use these as a front line really in the late game, because look at those stats. I mean, melee defense 59 for what is supposed to be a damage dealer is crazy. Only that armor is the big deal. But if you're attacking units that don't have a lot of damage in return, well, they'll kill them faster. And that 30% physical resistance is pretty nice. Then we have the Bringers of Bewilderment, the ROR version, which is overall very good. They will cause also the Charmed, by the way, I didn't spoke about it, effect, which is always nice. It's still the same flimsiness, you know, they won't cause, they will still get damaged by missiles, for instance. They have the Soul Scent, but they also have the Perfect Vigor, which is crazy to have on these units. You can just go around anything, dodge any missiles, and then suddenly you're at the enemy artillery and you start doing a lot of damage in the enemy lines. So overall, that's how I would use them. Following the cavalry, for instance, they are perfect for it. Now the big boys, the Chosen of Slaanesh, one of the best defenders of the game actually. Shielded, high armor, high melee defense 60. I mean, the base 60 is terrible to see when it's an enemy, but it's good to see when it's yours. The weapon strength, don't feel bad that they are not armor piercing, because they will do a lot of damage. 14 is really good actually. In the late game they'll become really good, and the only reason why they are not better is because of the next unit that you're about to see. But still, you can use these guys definitely if you have them available to you, and if you still want a little bit of that edge of melee attack and weapon strength, use these guys. If not, you can go for the Chosen of Slaanesh with Hell Scourges. Now, the best defender unit in the game? Pretty much. I mean, poison attacks with 70 melee defense. I mean, it gets to 89 later on, as you can see there. 42 weapon strength with 8 armor piercing. This is the real deal. The biggest problem is that they won't cause a lot of damage to armored enemies. But if you're not fighting armored, go against those slayers. They'll defeat them really well. Especially with that 89, I mean 89 melee defense. Then that's before any buffs from spells or heroes nearby. Yeah. Good luck getting rid of these guys. Or if you have a Chosen of Slaanesh Hell Scourges routing on you, you did something wrong. There's no way you did something right there. So overall, one of the best defenders of the game. Get some for your armies. Now to the first cavalry unit, a nice Hellstriders of Slaanesh unit, because it has quite a lot of speed, armor, and the shield, poison attacks, and anti-large. It's no wonder this unit was crazy overpowered in multiplayer, because, I mean, it has everything that you would want for a flanking unit or for a light cavalry unit. Perfect. It also causes fear, has the Strider. I mean, what else do you want? Oh, it has Soul Hunters. Okay, that's great. So put them against anyone that will die really fast to them. They'll get more damage because they will kill the entities, and suddenly you have a very powerful unit to hammer and anvil. So overall, still in the late game, you can use these guys, especially in those sweeper armies, for instance. Feel free. The poison effects, the bonuses versus large, just don't send them against like Blood Knights or something like that, but overall, you'll be fine. Powerful unit indeed, right out the gate for Slaanesh. Then we have the Hell Striders of Slaanesh with Hell Scourges. Now, because the other ones also have poison, the Hell Scourges here don't mean that. What it means is simply a nice change. So overall it has a good melee defense. Not as good melee attack, but it has better weapon strength, and it's mostly used against infantry, basically. So it's not anti-large, has more weapon strength, so let's go against the infantry on this case. Still the Vanguard deployment that you had unbenefited with the other one. Late game you can still use these guys, but of course remember they're not anti-large, so be careful when sending it against any large targets. Now the first unit of chariots is the Seeker Chariots. Overall, a very nice unit. Not a lot of armor, but still some of it. Good charge bonus and speed, of course. That's to be expected. Very poor melee attack and melee defense. The advantage with the poison, with the weapon strength, and the fact that it has armor piercing and bonuses versus infantry. Well, you figured it out. This unit is crazy good going against the enemy backline. You always have so many options with Slaanesh for that. Late game, you can definitely use these units on a pinch, but of course you have more advanced versions of the unit. Still, if you don't have a lot of money to recruit an army, well, no wonder you can check out some Seeker Chariots. Or you can go for some Chaos Chariots of Slaanesh, with the difference being that heavy armor, of course. Reduced weapon strength, not a lot of melee attack or melee defense values, really poor on this case, but still, that charge bonus, that speed should do some damage. Remember, it's one of the few that has the devastating flanker on it. And then in the late game, do note that it gets a little bit more bonuses versus infantry, some missile resistance. So overall, do consider that these will stay in battle a little bit. So if you're using Seeker Chariots and you're finding out that they're dying, you can try out some Chaos Chariots of Slaanesh to do a little bit of a better job into the mid-late game. Then we have the Sibilant Slaughtercade of Chaos Chariots, a very nice upgrade because they do have those poison attacks. So definitely one ROR that you should have on any army, because a chariot that causes poison attacks, you can just go across the enemy front line if you can, just debuffing if you no longer have that. Plus they do have the Soul Hunters, so if you manage to take out a weak enemy, they'll become much more powerful, especially with that devastating flanker. Remember that they do have that Vanguard deployment, so that's always very useful. Seekers of Slaanesh, it's a very nice shock cavalry unit. Overall, one of the worst armor, 5 armor only, it's really poor, but still, poison attacks with the magic, good melee attack, kind of acceptable melee defense. So they're a shock cavalry that has actually a nice attack and defense values. Armor piercing as well. Vanguard deployment and devastating flanker. That's always very useful on these sort of units. But at armor, no shield. It's really difficult to use these guys. In the late game, you can use a couple of these, like I mentioned, but still, there are better options overall. Don't forget that physical resistance and missile resistance can come in handy. Then we have the Hell Flayers. Now this is the upgrade from the Seeker Chariots overall. That's in essence it. Better stats overall, better melee attack, good melee defense comparatively it could be better, but a little bit more weapon strength. That charge bonus and speed always gets to be important in the ability. And then the Soul Scent, which is always nice. You also have a much better stats overall later on with the charge speed, with the leadership. Perfect. A nice addition to your forces. Then we have the Heart Seekers of Slaanesh, one of my favorite cavalry units actually, just because they're so fast and these guys are quite a melee cavalry actually. They're demonic, which is the big problem, but they do have quite high leadership. They have the Soul Scent ability, so if they start wavering, these guys will go to town on them. Oh my god. So Vanguard deployment, that's why I really like. It's very rare to have a kind of heavy, mid-heavy cavalry that it has Vanguard deployment. And in the late game, you can see that they get that missile resistance, so important. A nice augmentation with the leadership, with a melee attack reaching 64. So overall, very nice unit to have even into the late game. Then you have the Heart Seekers of Slaanesh ROR, the Eternal Entourage. Overall, the same unit, just better stats overall, still devastating flanker, but they do have the Obsessive Adoration, which gives a nice buff of melee attack, base weapon damage, armor piercing weapon damage to a lord or hero. Perfect to join with the Mirror Guard. Just do it. The lord and hero will be so crazy good. Perfect vigor always helps, and that Vanguard. So overall, a very nice unit to have alongside your other Heart Seekers. Seekers and your Lord and Hero. Exalted Seeker Chariot, overall a nice single entity, very powerful weapon strength, especially for a chariot unit. That's really crazy. Bonuses versus infantry 30, that means you're gonna mow down enemy infantry. The charge bonus and the speed, of course, always make sure that you charge these units, don't just let them engage the enemy overall. Perfect Vigor means keep charging, keep sending in. That's how you should keep this Exalted Seeker Chariot moving. Those magical attacks and poison debuffs are going to be crazy on the enemy backline. That's how you should intend. Now, in the late game, of course, it reaches good melee stats. 51 melee attack, 41 melee defense, nothing to run away from. Just the poor armor and lack of shield, but overall a very nice unit to have. Really consider using some Exalted Seekers, guys. Then we have the Chaos Knights of Slaanesh. Now we get the mortal variants, which are very good. For Slaanesh, they have pretty high stats of melee, 42, 50. This is always means a melee unit, and then or someone that should stay in combat. And then you have a nice weapon strength there. Armor piercing weapon damage of 16 base. It's really good. And then you have devastating flankers. So overall, man, the Chaos Knights of Slaanesh, they're so powerful indeed. Especially late game. 59, 61 in terms of melee attack and melee defense. Please so. And then you get the resistances. Overall, a powerful unit to have. Or you can have the Chaos Knights of Slaanesh with lances. Overall the same unit, but much more powerful charge. So if you're already very good at flanking the enemy, or if you have an enemy that will definitely be flanked, definitely bring out the Chaos Knights of Slaanesh. All the good stats of the Chaos Knights, the standard one, but still a much more powerful charge. In the late game, they kind of become like a mixed hybrid of shock cavalry and melee cavalry with that high melee attack and melee defense. So definitely you can use these guys well into the late game. Just be my guest. Try them out. Now to the only missile unit of Slaanesh, that's right, the Marauder Horsemen of Slaanesh. Now they're very important because they are the only missile unit. Very poor stats overall, they do have some physical resistance, very low range. Vanguard deployment helps, especially if you can pinpoint where the enemy is going to be. But these guys should mainly be used against flyers. That's the main usage that I would do to them. A couple of them to hunt down a powerful enemy flyer, especially late game. Consider using these guys with the Chaos Lords, not the Heralds, but still a couple of these just to dominate some flyers, or you can use the Chaos Spheres later on, of course. But if you prefer the mobility of a cavalry unit to follow along your other cavalry units, by all means, get a couple of these guys. Now to the Monsters and Beasts, starting with the Chaos Furies, your only flying unit, which is a big problem because there's a lot of flyers out there and these guys won't cut it. Still powerful weapon strength with good armor piercing, so these are not your overall bats. Vanguard deployment means that you can at least think precisely where you want to send them in. Good charge bonus and speed, of course, your Slaanesh, but overall very low armor, no shield, very low melee defense. Just don't keep them in prolonged combat for too long, okay? Just make sure that it's a hit and run tactic, or just send them in to try and defeat a powerful enemy, and that's it. The Spawn of Slaanesh, a nice unbreakable unit. That's the main usage for this unit, to ensure that you don't run away. Poor armor, of course, that's the same with all Slaanesh, but that soporific musk does help to survive a little bit longer, of course. Good weapon strength, not a lot of armor piercing, but still it's powerful. They do have the Strider ability, so always make sure with Slaanesh you don't have any issues with the higher ground. Let them have the higher ground. You don't have any issues with that. Late game, you can still bring a couple of these guys, or at least into the mid game, because of course you do have some more powerful monstrous infantry, but still, don't neglect these guys if you need just a strong damage dealer in the front line. Or you can have the Fiends of Slaanesh, a slightly faster version. These guys are cavalry based, basically, monsters. That's the idea. The Soporific Musk helps against enemy other targets, reducing their melee attack and melee defense. Weapon strength is powerful, armor piercing, that's the main selling point of these guys compared to the Chaos Spawn. They're faster in their armor piercing. That's overall what they have, but always remember that they're squishy. It's always the same thing with the Slaanesh units, right? They look really cool, but enemy missiles will demolish these guys, so be careful. Now, late game, you can definitely bring them out, and in melee, they'll behave really well. Chaos War Shrine of Slaanesh. Now, a support unit, mainly you use these guys with a hero as a mount, you know, but still, if you bring one along, don't worry, it's still a nice idea, because they will fight well in melee, well enough, and then they'll have the Giver of Torturous Glory passive ability, direct damage ability, so this is a Mortis engine effect. With each nearby enemy death, they get it much better. So overall, you can start a Mortis engine with these guys, and it's crazy good, it's crazy easy to do with Slaanesh if you know how. If you flank the enemy, suddenly you send in the Chaos War Shrine, it will get the damage. And also has these good leadership buffs. So overall, keeping your demonic units alive is always so important. I'll recommend to bring at least one if you're using a demonic sort of army, and that's good. In the late game, it becomes quite decent to as a support unit, but don't send it out against any other single entities, okay? Against enemy single entities, try a Soul Grinder. So overall, a powerful single entity, good armor, good speed, melee attack with that soporific musk, which is crazy good in duels, you know. And then that weapon strength with the bonuses versus large means, well, yeah, the enemy large entities gotta be careful against this guy. Overall, the devastating flanker, if you can pin them, the enemy single entity with someone else and then flank with this guy, oh my god, it does so much damage. But overall, in the late game, it becomes much better. That additional armor, leadership, melee attack, melee defense, I mean 73 melee attack, it's really powerful. Use it at your leisure. Or you can have a Keeper of Secrets. Shielded with very poor armor still, but that shield helps out against enemy missiles. Powerful armor piercing weapon damage and its magical attacks. And then we have two abilities. The Lash of Slaanesh, a powerful breath spell, and then Acquiescence, a nice debuff of speed and melee defense, perfect for an enemy hero, enemy cavalry, you know. Just use that Acquiescence spell and then suddenly you can engage the enemy cavalry and do a lot of damage to it. Late game, bring a couple of these units in your armies, especially if you theme those around. They're really powerful and will make you very happy. And then you have the Marquise of Masochism, the ROR of Keeper of Secrets, and it has a really good combination, so overall similar stats to the other one, but instead it has the Phantasmagoria bound spell, which is enemies in range minus debuff of leadership and then they cannot move. So it does so much for you. That debuff and slowing them down, or actually stopping them down, it's crazy. You can get everyone in place for the massive attack just because you send this guy in. And then they can't do a lot of damage because he has that passive. And then he can heal if the enemies start wavering. So you can send him in and then block everyone out, lock them in, you cause the damage, and suddenly he's healing. See the idea? That's how you play this guy. Send him in first, be careful with enemy missiles, but come on, it's a powerful addition to any of your armies. Use it well. And there we go, that's the Slaanesh roster. I hope this gives you a bit of an idea of how you can play out Slaanesh in battles. If not, I'll try to make some guides for it. It's always a nice faction because it's different. It doesn't have a lot of advantages against flyers, or it doesn't have missile units per se, but still it's so powerful to see these guys in melee. It has a weakness that you can exploit and kind of go around it, so it's always nice to have this sort of ideas of a theme being well implemented into the game. So overall, a very nice army to try and use. Just be careful against strong enemy missiles or flyers and you should be fine. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye bye.